All right, folks. So we're on our review week 2. This is our last active teaching week. Um, we have our mock assessment next week, and then our actual final assessment in week 13, so 2 weeks away. So this is the last active teaching week, but we'll go through what's happening next week at the end. Okay. So this is our agenda today. We're looking at CSS. Some of these will be quite quick. Okay. There's one, frameworks near the end. That's going to be one slide. We went through that, so we're not labouring a lot of points there. But a lot of it is just to quickly review, refresh your minds on a lot of these things, because obviously CSS is a big part of web design. So why use CSS? It basically defines the stance for our web pages. Okay, I started at the very beginning saying that if you think of the human body of it as a human body, rather, the HTML is the skeleton. It will hold the page together. It will be the structure. The CSS will give the layout and describe. It'll add the flesh. It'll look at eye color, a lot of the styles. So hair color, face size, all those sort of things. But in web design, we're thinking about the fonts, the font sizes, a lot of the styling issue, spacing, how things look in terms of the actual format of the web page. Okay, HTML is only intended to contain the tags for structuring the web page. So we've got our H1 tag, a paragraph tag, a section tag, whatever it is, to format the HTML page. So commenting CSS, we're highlighting this. This is a really simple thing, and it's something that we're going to be looking for in coursework 2. But the small image there just gives a quick example of what a single line comment looks like. So we're expecting to see these comments throughout your web pages and throughout your CSS pages. And all it does is add a bit of structure. It doesn't need to be a long comment. It can just be, this section is the image gallery, it's the video embed. But the fact that you're structuring your site, it'll stand out for us, that basically it says you know what you're doing. As far as the HTML goes, the the comments will be ignored by the browsers, so you won't ever see it on the page. But it is important, more so in the CSS, when you're structuring things, even within your media queries. You'll have your CSS for desktop, for tablet, for mobile phone, and so it's helpful just to comment even those sections and say what they're doing. And it can be one line, so it's not a big deal. It's just a good thing to get into way and into practice of doing, and that obviously goes across all aspects of computing. But this is just how it looks like in HTML, so this is what we're expecting to see. WebSafe and Google fonts. Okay, first of all, WebSafe fonts are basically the standard fonts that the web can use. Okay, there'll be general practice in this would be that you choose a font, what's called a font family, where you have maybe several different fonts in a list, and you're basically saying, my first choice is Helvetica, my second choice is Times New Roman, my third choice is Arial, and it simply tells the web browser that if for whatever reason Helvetica doesn't work, there's another choice and another choice and another choice that you've chosen that really just loads up the page that still works. Okay, so it's a good having a font, declaring the font family is a good practice, because, like I said, if one doesn't work, it goes on to the next and on to the next, and it just gives you that safety net. Okay, the WebSafe fonts are as follows. Okay, there are different types of fonts. So there are serif fonts. They're the ones with the tails, the little flicks, sort of on each character. You'll see those in formal sites. So traditionally, you think financial sectors, banks, corporate websites, those sort of things where it's the site is serious. So it's not. It's not joking about. It's not necessarily Facebook, but it's a more serious site. So it kind of adds a bit of credibility. So you've got the list there. Okay, I'm not going to read through them, but you can see the list. Sans serif font. It's on the first column, but the actual examples are in the second column. So you've got Arial, Helvetica, sans serif, so on and so on. Comic Sans is in there, but you'll never use it because you should never use it as a serious computing student and designer. But they're there, so you can put in the list. The sans serif are obviously without the serifs, so they're just the straightforward. They're bit less formal. This presentation, I think, is Helvetica, so you can see, there's no, there's none of the little flicks at the end. And then the monospace fonts, they are very rarely used, but you would see them in, actually you would see them there. That single line comment, that text is monospace. It's a monospace font. You'd see it within the if you're looking at any web pages that are talking about code and give code examples, that they usually use a monospace font to just really separate out what is computer code and what is sort of HTML and what is normal paragraph writing. So they're the web-safe fonts. You can call in any of those, and you won't need to do any extra work. In terms of what we're going to talk about next. But you can just say your font family, and then you list whichever they are. Some of them are grouped together automatically. So if you chose Times New Roman, it would be a font family that would go with it, or Arial and so on. So it kind of lowers the amount of work you need to do there. So they're web safe. They just work across on every browser. There's no extra work needed. We then have Google Fonts. Okay, it's owned by Google, but it's open source, and so it's free to use, and it's pretty straightforward. You can go to, if you search for Google Fonts, that'll take you to the site. There are 987 different fonts, all working within the serif, sans serif, monospace type categories. The most popular choices are there: the Roboto, Open Sans, and Lado. They're all sans serif fonts, so they're variations on that theme. But they're the most popular. To embed them, to use them rather, you would click through on the font that you want to use, and then they talk about the font family. But where that differs from what I was talking about just in the previous screen, the font family that Google are talking about here is, say, the Roboto font, but all the different sizes within it, so 12, 14, 16, 18, so on, up the font size. So that is what they call a font family. So where in that image there, where the third line where it says Roboto : WGH the weight WGHT at 100. That's the font size. So it goes up in hundreds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on. But that's the font family. So hopefully don't get confused in that. It's just the different sizes. So you could call in the Roboto font at 400, as opposed to the 100 that I selected, and that is still part of that font family. So it's different to the web-safe fonts we were talking about. But when you've chosen the font, you will get that embed code, the link ref, href, and that will you call that into your HTML page, similar stage to your CSS, and then in the CSS where it says just underneath CSS rules to specify family, that's the actual code you put in your CSS file, and that's it. So that's all the work that you need to do for Google Fonts. It's good to play around with it and just make sure you know how to do it. It's not a big task. It's not a complicated task, but again, just making sure you can do it. It's a good choice because they're pretty safe as well, as far as comparing to the web safe fonts. They'll always load in. I've never seen them not load because you're calling in that embed file, so it's 99.9% of the time it should work. So they're fairly safe there. But there's a lot more choice there that you can call on rather than just using the web safe fonts, and it can set your site a wee bit separate to any others. But obviously Google are fairly popular, so chances are a load of other sites will use the same font that you've chosen. But it's not a big deal because they're still good looking fonts. Margins then. Margins, we're working with the space around the elements, so we're not wanting to cramp everything together like in a newspaper broadsheet or magazine, where there's only so much space and we need to make best use of the space. So let's kind of push everything together. With the web, we can space things out. We can make images with a bit of margin and really just define the space around it and sculpt the experience of the web page. And so you have full control over the margins, as we're saying there. There are properties setting margin for each side of an element. So this is where it can get a little complicated. I don't think we have this example here. So in this example on the screen, we've just declared the margin. So that's as one value. So that's on each four. If you think of a square, even of that that image, the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. We're just declaring a margin of 70 pixels around the whole thing. But we can be so much more precise, as in this next slide with the example. You can then just call in, working on the same process, top, bottom, right, left, call in different sizes of margin on different sides, depending on what it is you're designing and what sort of look you're going for. But you can see there we've declared in those four values, in those four margin values, we've called in four different numbers, four different margins, for different reasons, and you can see it in the example beneath. The margins are different, okay, and it just gives us that bit more control. You don't have to do it. You can. There is a way you can call just margin and then call it with four values. Don't have it, but you would have just four numbers, one after another, separated with a comma, working on the same pattern, top, bottom, right, left, and each of those numbers would fall into place accordingly. So there is different ways to play around with that, and again, that's something that you should be doing, just playing around, breaking things, seeing how it works, seeing what you can do, and working it differently. But that will create space around our paragraphs or images or whatever it is we're working with, and it's a good way just to separate things out and give things a bit of space and a bit of room to make it easier to read. Because if you even compare my writing on the screen underneath the margin example title compared to the code, you can see the spacing is different, and one is much easier to read. There's more space. There's no mistakes. Whereas the image example, everything is very much crushed together, line after line, and so and even with the bottom image, it just makes it a wee bit harder to read. So when we space things out and give it a bit of space, it just makes it easier for everyone. So that's why we use margins. Padding then is similar. Padding and margin aren't the same, but they do kind of overlap in terms of what we're doing. And this is again, it's creating space around the content. We can call it in exactly the same way as with margin. So we'd call padding, and just have one set value around the whole element, or we can call in padding top, right, left, bottom, so on, and specify individual values if that's what was needed. But that would obviously depend on the job, the project, what you're doing. But it works in very much the same way, but it is different, okay? And I can show an example actually shortly of how those differ. So we've kind of covered this, just that there's different ways to implement padding. The bottom example is actually a good example of how we can call in the padding of different values in one line without calling four padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. We can just call padding in one line and then have the four values in order, and that gives you the same control as declaring them all individually, but saves you the time of having to write out padding, the 4 lines of CSS rules. So that is probably something to work towards. Certainly, when you get confident with working with the padding, and you can then move away from the 4 lines into one with the 4 different values, and it will work great. And it's obviously works well. It's good for your overall site that you do obviously use padding where it's needed. So the box model up next. The box model is basically, if you think of all web pages as a series of boxes, you have the one big box where everything is contained within the page, and then you have lots of smaller boxes within these, and they'll all have margins, borders, paddings, and then the content right in the center. So this is what I was alluding to just slightly earlier, a few screens back. You've got the content in the middle, we've got our padding, we've got our border, and then we've got our margin. You may not always use the border, and the border may not always be a color. It can just be an invisible line, just that it segments everything. But you can see just how the padding and the margin can just create that extra space around the content. And there are, you can look at any web page and you'll see this in action with different values, and I'll show you it shortly. But that is basically the box model. So you have the content in the very middle, then you have padding, border, margin, and that is basically what's around. And when you think of the web page as a series of different boxes, you can then begin to segment everything a little bit better. You can then comment everything a lot easier because everything is a set box. This is a box, this is a box, so on. And you can comment what each one does, even if it's a class that you're calling in where it's the same size and the same values. You can still just comment it out and say this is what this is, and it just makes your HTML and CSS structure a lot easier to work with. So we've kind of covered this, so I'm not going to read through it, but it just explains each example. They are fairly straightforward there, as I'm sure you're seeing, but that explains what I've really covered already, but what each element is, just a bit more explanation. So just a quick demonstration of the box model. So we've got the HTML and CSS code on one side, and then the output, what we see on the actual screen. So you can see the code, what we've called. We've got background color, we've got width, border, we've called the border in this example just to make it nice and easy and clear. We've got padding, and we have the margin. So working outwards from the actual text, because that's where that's the content. We then have our padding, which you can see in the grey space between the text and the border. We then have our border, and then we have a small, you can see it best at the top side, because we've got a line of text, and then between the second line and the div box, we have a bit of space, and that is the 20 pixels in the margin. So that's what 20 pixels. So it's not a big amount of space, but it just gives us that little bit of space to segment everything and work on the presentation and make it a wee bit easier to read. Of course, in this example, we've declared the border as a solid green color. You will rarely declare a border. Sometimes there may be no border. It can also be transparent, but working that structure always just gives you that consistent design, consistent spacing, and and just it will really improve the layout and the readability of your web page. Columns next. We have kind of covered columns in framework, so we're not going to make a big deal of them, but columns can work. Obviously, in this example, you can structure your web page with multiple lines of text. It's not, I can't think of too many examples off the top of my head that would work in columns, but it can work for a particular layout. Like with newspapers, if you're wanting to recreate that old look and feel of the old style sort of broadsheets where it is all columnized, then it's quite easy to do. I personally would work with columns a wee bit more in presenting quick points. So instead of paragraphs of text, it would be maybe 3 distinct points, but that are arranged in columns. So still very much used in web design, but not necessarily for text. Maybe not the best example there, but certainly you will use columns quite a bit, as you've seen in frameworks. There are 3 ways to declare columns. So you can declare the column count, declare the column width, or you can declare both, which is recommended. There are other elements to declare when you're customizing your columns, and they are there. But for a full explanation and a much better explanation than what I could give, go to the Chris Coyer CSS Tricks website. The link is there to the guide to responsive-friendly CSS columns. It will tell you absolutely everything. It will go through the how to declare column count, column count, column width. It's almost a step-by-step guide. So it really does go through absolutely everything and helps you set it up from scratch, which is obviously very useful when you're learning how to declare set up columns. But that link is there, and I would say absolutely go and have a look at that and make sure you know how to do it. Flexbox then, Flexbox is well, basically a bit of history. Before the Flexbox layout module, there were 4 layout modes. Okay, so we had block, we had inline, and we had tables, and then we had positions. Flexbox makes life a heck of a lot easier because once upon a time we used tables to create web pages. So if you think of a spreadsheet, that sort of tabular layout, it worked and it had a function, but it was really nasty to try and get your head around. And then position, we would sort of float things left and right and try and position things it was almost a poorer way from tables, but it was progress. But Flexbox makes it a lot easier to design a flexible, responsive layout structure without using the float or the positioning or the table. You don't want to use table, as I've said before, for designing web pages. You only want to use it when you have a table of information, that it is appropriate to put in a table. So a menu, for example, if you were designing a restaurant website, absolutely fine. A lot of companies would actually just put up a PDF, but if you wanted to create it in a table, that's fine. It's appropriate, but not for designing an actual web page. Yeah, I'm going to jump out for this quick clip just to show you the Flexbox in action. Okay, so it's very simple. The video will show it. You can see how the 8 boxes, they change in width, but they're still all the same regardless of the size. That is just the example. So it's very useful that no matter what size the screen is, they're still going to be the same size depending on the screen size. And it's a much better way of working. Again, look up the CSS Tricks website for the complete guide to using Flexbox. It'll go into a lot more detail than what we are here. We're kind of just reviewing everything at the end of the module, but that is there, and that link will take you to it. Grid systems is up next. We have covered this a fair bit with frameworks because they're baked in from the beginning. But a lot of pages do work on this grid view, which means when you divide into columns, so we will be working with columns an awful lot. So it does make sense that you get used to them because they're there, they're so common, and to be honest, they're expected. So it would be quite surprising if you didn't know how to work with columns. But this grid view, as you can see, makes it helpful to design a web page. The purple banner at the top can be our logo, our navigation links at the top of the page, search bar. The three wide blue bars, the 4 on the left of the screen, can be a secondary menu or navigation system. On the single block on the other side of the screen could be our aside function for different links, and then we've got our footer at the bottom, and we're working with a very distinct number of columns that makes it easier to place items on the page. So it really does make your life a little bit easier because we've kind of moved away from the table into this grid system, which isn't actually too different when you think about it in comparison. Whether you have a table, you're still going to have columns in that table, but this just makes it easier to design and a wee bit nicer for the developer, really, for us to build the web page. Rather than working in tables, we're working in this grid view where everything can be called in and be very consistent very quickly. So from W3C schools, the responsive grid view often has 12 columns and will have a total width of 100%. It'll shrink and expand as you resize the browser window. As you saw in the Flexbox video, no matter what size we moved the screen to, it shrank and expanded accordingly, and the responsive grid will do the same. So it does make your life easier. Whether we're talking about an iPhone screen, a mobile screen of say 600 pixels, that's going to have the same. Because we're working with percentages, that iPhone, not iPhone, but that tablet screen, sorry, phone screen is going to be 100%. It's the screen we have. When we move to tablet, we're still working with 100% of the screen, but it's going to resize and expand, and it's still going to be working with the same percentage values. So if the hero image at the top of the page is 100%, it's always going to be 100%, but it's going to look different, obviously, across screens. So this really helps us out. And we'll see an example of this when we're talking about media queries, why this is important and why it changes the experience for the user. But I'll come back to that. Can CSS replace JavaScript? This is probably something that you haven't considered because we're still maybe at that beginning phase, but there is a good amount of overlap between CSS and JavaScript for certain things. As we're saying there, yeah, the lines are blurring, and it is a case of CSS being able to is sort of moving in on JavaScript territory, really. So things that we used to use JavaScript for, we're now using CSS, and so it's appropriate because CSS will work quicker than JavaScript. So it makes sense, from our point of view, where we're concerned about how quickly a page loads. Well, of course, it's going to make, if we can use CSS and that works just the same way but quicker, of course we're going to use that. Okay, it feels better in that third point there. Errors in JavaScript will stop the page, but with CSS, if it doesn't work, it just moves on. It just kind of goes, okay, it doesn't work, well, on to the next bit. And so you simply just will have maybe a blank section, which isn't great, but you're still loading up the web page, so it's still better than a JavaScript complete fail. Where we would really say to use CSS rather than JavaScript is for the simpler transitions. So if we're toggling UI element states, so for example, dark mode, okay, if that was being toggled on and off, that would be a CSS call, because that's essentially a button click. So it's much easier to use CSS. But for JavaScript, where we want to have advanced effects, so things like bouncing, stop, pause, rewind, slow down, those sort of effects, then JavaScript is what we're going to call. And if you think of your phone, if you're scrolling a web page and you get to the bottom and it kind of pulls up and then falls back down, that would be a form of JavaScript. That animation, we're pulling beyond where the bottom, and then it bounces back down. So it's sort of mimicking that gravity effect. But that would be we call that in through JavaScript. Well, we would never call that through CSS because it's too complicated. But the lines are blurring, and there's constant tutorial pages going up where people are playing at home, developers playing around with CSS at home and working out how to do something in CSS rather than using the JavaScript, because it renders faster. So if they can do it, they want to learn how to do it, and then they'll share those ideas. So it's something that's constantly moving and transitioning. General approach, we've kind of covered this, so I'm not going to labor it too much, but basically if we're looking for interaction from the user, so hovering, focusing, clicking, we can use CSS, but if we use JavaScript, but if it needs to change in visibility, so animate, some sort of animation, then we use CSS. Responsive CSS then and into viewports. Okay, the viewport is what we're talking about. When we're talking about viewport, we're talking about what the user sees on the web page. Okay, so it's their screen size. The viewport will vary with the device. So obviously the mobile screen will be much smaller than a desktop screen, and then tablets will obviously fit in the middle somewhere. So when we started using the internet, tablets and mobile phones, with using them, the web pages that were designed for desktops were too big to fit the viewport, and so we got this kind of macro view, of looking at the whole page, but it was squashed into the screen. And I think there's the example I was also referring to earlier. So if the first example, we'll go back a slide, but if we look at the without the viewport meta tag, the text is impossible to read. We're seeing the image, seeing that there is text, but we can't read it because the screen is just trying to get everything in the best way it can. But when we use the viewport meta tag, it's saying, right, look, this is the screen we're working with. It then fits everything to it and makes it much easier to read and much better for the user. So yeah, we've covered that. So when we're setting the viewport, we simply use the meta tag. So in the third line, that gives the example of what the code would say, and everything else is just an explanation. But we're basically saying, look, there's a chance this person may be using a different screen to what we're thinking of, but we need to basically make the device width to be whatever the device width is, to be 100%. Okay, so the bottom point, the initial scale equals 1.0, sets the initial zoom level. So we're always wanting to work with 1. It doesn't matter whether it's a mobile screen, a tablet screen, or a desktop screen. We always want it to be 100% essentially of whatever the screen is, and that gives us our best way forward. So you can see how that works. We're not going to talk over this slide again, but you can, it's instantaneous. You can see which one works better because we're using a viewport meta tag, and that makes it so much easier for everyone. So additional rules to follow when setting the viewport. Okay, do not use large fixed width elements. So if an image is displayed at a width wider than the viewport, it can cause the viewport to scroll horizontally. Okay, we do not want to do that. Okay, it is one of the worst things that you can see on a web page. If you can choose a site that will scroll horizontally as opposed to one that scrolls vertically, but never both. Okay, it just looks really bad. So we don't use large fixed width elements. We don't let the content rely on a particular viewport to render well. We can't design for desktop first. We can design for mobile first because everything then will fit around that and sort of scale up. But we can't say this element needs to be 400, say 600 pixels wide, and it has to be 600 pixels wide. We're stuck because once we go to a mobile screen that's maybe 480, well, the 600, we've got 120 pixels worth that is going to go off the screen. So we always want it to fit within the screen. And we should use CSS media queries to apply the different stylings for small and large screens. This is, we have hopefully seen this in frameworks because it should be set up, and you have seen this through the responsive web design section where we're setting up media queries to set our widths for different screen sizes. But we're always working with 100% of the screen, whether it's 460 pixels, 480 pixels, 600 and whatever, or 1000. We're always wanting to design for 100%, and so we're working to what we have. So the viewport helps us to do that. Media queries, then, we've kind of touched on. This is a new technique that's sort of come in the last couple of years just with CSS3. But the media query basically allows us to work with a device width. So where we're declaring the viewport, this is also help. These are going hand in hand because we need to declare what size the screen is. So in this example, halfway down you can see the media only screen and max width 600 pixels. So we're probably working for probably a tablet for the size there. Maybe no, actually that's the phone size. Sorry. So we're looking at phone size, whether it's being held vertically or rotated horizontally. That's going to work within that that setting. So that's our media query for phones, and then everything will resize accordingly. But once we get bigger, then we need other rules to work with that. So we can add what are called breakpoints, and these are basically what they sound. It's a point in the screen at which the design breaks into the next design setting. So you can do this yourself on your own browser at home. You can sort of scale the size of the web browser down, slide it down, and if you do it slow enough, you'll see the exact point where the site moves from desktop to tablet, and it essentially breaks the design into another design, and then again from the tablet view down into the mobile view. And so they are imaginatively called breakpoints because they are exactly what they sound like. But they give the web page the information at this point, and it's generally a pixel value. So the example there on the screen has a breakpoint at 768 pixels. So basically, if you think it's pixel number 769, it's still in the desktop version, but once it hits 768 and goes below, it goes into the different view screen for so it rearranges the website into the mobile view, and so that gives, again, like programming, we have to tell the browser exactly what to do and when to do it, and when that happens, here's what everything has to look like. So we're giving it those step-by-step instructions, and so this is the implementation of responsive web design. So I've mentioned this in the course of the module, but designing for mobile first is generally probably the best way at the minute at present, because we are, over 50% of web traffic comes from mobile devices, whether that's a phone or a tablet. But when we're designing for mobile first, we're looking at how the page will display faster on smaller screens. And because we're working with less space on the phone screen, we then have to decide what is most important. And I know I've shown examples of this where the page is reconstructed in a different order on the mobile screen to the desktop screen, but it reorders things in terms of importance, and it moves things around. And that is a good way to design, because you do work with what's important. You do work with those priorities on the web page as to what is of most importance, and then you work down. Because when you're working with more space, you can fit your priority list probably closer together on the screen. But when you're working with your mobile first, you really you've got no room for error, so your priorities have to be correct, and so it really does help your design process. And so instead of changing the styles when the width gets smaller, we're then designing the opposite way, saying, right, when it gets bigger, this is what it's going to look like. When it gets bigger again, this is what it's going to look like. And so this is what makes our design essentially mobile first. This is probably an important screen today, because if you're still getting to grips with the breakpoints and the media queries, this kind of sets out what is generally the typical device breakdown. So if you were to use these values in your media queries, you generally wouldn't go wrong with your site design. So small devices, extra small devices. So we're looking at phones, which would be 600 pixels and down. We're thinking about obviously holding the phone vertically and horizontally, depending on what way we're looking at the phone. But that covers 600 pixels, covers the extra small devices. We then have our small devices, which is our portrait tablets and large phones. Obviously things are still changing. Phone sizes now getting up to 6-7 inch size screens, but we're thinking about the smaller ones, which there's still a market for. But that's kind of where we're working. Small devices, then we're saying portrait tablets and large phones. So probably your I hate mentioning specific phones, but the sort of iPhone 11 Pro, the larger versions, or the Galaxy Note, those larger than large phones, and that's probably where we're thinking of there. Next up, we have our medium devices, so that's our landscape tablets, and you can see the values, how we're working upwards. Large devices then are our laptops and desktops, probably our small desktops in fairness, but we're thinking about the screens there. Laptops, we'd be thinking about MacBook Pros or 11, some Surface tablets, so the 11-inch, 11, 12, 13, maybe 14-inch screens, maybe not so much 14, but so that 11 to 13-inch screen range. And then the large devices, we're looking at the large laptops, the 15-inch laptops, bigger, and then obviously the big desktops or widescreen obviously monitors for desktops. And you can see the values that we're working at, and how that builds up and suppose equally builds breaks down. But if you were working with those values in your media queries, you wouldn't go that far wrong, because we're not designing for specific screen sizes or specific phones or devices. We're designing for screen sizes, so we're catching everything that way. Responsive images then, so again, we're not just working with we're making everything responsive when we're working in this within these media queries. But if we set the width property to a percentage and the height set to auto, then the image will be responsive and it will scale up and down. In this example, the image can be scaled up but it can be scaled up to larger than its original size. So this isn't exactly the best solution. So the better solution, we're saying then, is to be using the max width property instead, which looks like so. So there's not that big a change in terms of our code, but we're simply saying the maximum width for this image, funnily enough, is going to be 100%. So if we convert 100% to being 800 by 600, it's not going to get bigger than those dimensions, but we're still working with the 100%. So it's a semantic kind of change, but it does give us that security that the image isn't going to get bigger than 100% and then look rubbish. We're really deciding every decision along the way to make sure that everything looks as we intended, but to its best ability. Responsive videos then, this is exactly the same. The only difference really is that we're talking about video rather than images. We're making the same point. We could set the video width to be 100, but it could scale beyond that. So again, if you're declaring video, we're just working with max width. So we're just saying it's not going to get bigger than this, because we don't want video or an image to take over other content. So we're just simply making this setting and we're moving on. Responsive frameworks, we are not obviously dealing with in a great amount of detail. We did deal with this in extensive detail in week 9. If you did work with this, I'm hoping during your own time to get the grips of this. There are lots of different CSS frameworks that offer responsive design. They're free and easy to use. And if you want anything more, then I will direct you to week 9, where you'll be able to see all that work there. That's all we're saying on that. Templates then kind of fits in with the framework. You may download the framework, but you can get a lot of templates to base your website on, and they do exist. There are free and there are premium templates or paid templates. And obviously the last point shouldn't really be needed to be made, but it is there. We are aware of obviously coursework 2 being worked at home. We obviously can't control everything, but we will be able to identify what's your work and what's not your work. And there are ways for us to find this out. So the simple thing is don't look at them. By all means, look at the templates, get ideas, but just as far as coursework 2 goes, don't use them. Okay, you probably won't be able to use them, but they're there. Okay, I'm aware of them. Mel's aware of them. So don't try and play the game, because you will get caught. But by all means, use them to learn off. Because they will be designed by someone who works at this full time, who is better than you and better than me. So by all means, yes, use the templates for a learning process. See, even look at the code and see what they're doing and how they're doing it, and copy to learn, but don't pay to cut corners. And guys, that is the lecture. That's all that we have in terms of this. But we just quickly, yeah, so let me just jump into Canvas. Yeah. So we're at the last active teaching week. So week 11, we recap on the module. Next week we have our practical lab mock assessment. So I'm not going to go through this yet because it's not 100% finished, but there will be things there that you can see. We are trying just this as essentially as the trial run for the real thing. We would have been doing this anyway before we working at home, but with us working at home, that creates a new aspect to it that we hadn't planned for. So this first week will be an interesting week for all of us because we're going to see any mistakes coming up here, and hopefully, if any mistakes come up here on my part, then I can fix them in time for the real thing. You're probably just trying to read as much of the screen as you can see. Yeah, you'll have the 3 hours to build the website according to the files that are on the page, and then an extra 30 minutes to upload your files. So you'll be uploading them in a zip folder. This will all be released next week. We'll be starting at 9:30. I planned for this page to be published at 9:30, but I'll be sitting at my computer and I'll send out a Teams link like I did yesterday for today. I'll send this out and I'll just be sitting on Teams. I'll be working on my computer and I'll be available. So if there are any questions, you can use the link, hop in, ask me the question, and then if there is an issue, probably everyone's having it, so we can fix that accordingly. But hopefully there won't be any issues that come up with. Equally, if there are any questions that maybe something's just not clear, then this is a mock assessment, so ask, because if there's something that we can make it as stress-free in terms of the additional stuff, then I want to cut those out. Obviously, I can't remove any stress you're feeling about designing the site, but there it is. So that's going to be next week. The following week then, will be the actual assessment. So if all things being considered, next week runs really well and error-free. Week 13 is going to be a carbon copy. So what happens next week should be an exact rerun for week 13. So hopefully it will work exactly the same way for you. The only final thing then to talk to you about, guys, unless there's any questions, and I'll jump in, jump back. Okay, I'm going to do it. Right. No questions. Okay. Right. So yeah, the last thing then is your task that you've been doing over to the other side of Easter was working on the code snippet library. I'm going to add a link in here for you to submit this to me next Wednesday. I do hope that you've been working on it, because this code snippet will basically, shouldn't really describe it this way, but it will almost be like an answer booklet for you. It won't have, there will still be a bit of work for you in the site, but if you've done this properly and got everything working, this code snippet library could make your life a lot quicker and a lot easier. So if you haven't started it, I would absolutely say do it this week, because there's a lot of open the document. There's a lot of things in there that we reuse code all the time. So having this sort of document in your armory is a super super thing to have. Because, you're not recreating code; you're just looking for a particular task. So we've given a few direct places to go through there, and then the list. Yeah. So I mean, Mel and I have decided on the website that we'll be building for week 13, and And there's quite a few things in there that would make your life a lot easier. So, this is a bit of work that you can actively do that will significantly lower your stress when it comes to either week, 12 or 13. And the idea I would hope is, right, you know, with the week 12 practical, with it being a mock assessment, that's where you want to make your mistakes and kind of get the feel of how this is going to work for you in week 13. Because then in week 13, you're doing the right, I know what mistakes I've made, I know what to avoid, I know what not to do, and that will then save you time. Because, while we do have that 3 hour window plus the 30 minutes, which, I think, being honest, some of you may use that, uh, as a little bit of extra time, which I can't control. But once those 3 hours and 30 minutes are gone and the Canvas submission page is locked on, that's it. So if you have that code snippet library built, that will speed you up. Okay, because 3 hours to build a site is fairly difficult. Okay, I appreciate that, but that's built in for a reason. There's a level of difficulty, obviously, that we need to assess you at and challenge you in. But you want to be able to make maximum use of this site, of this time. And so that is that. I am reluctant to explain absolutely everything because there will be everything here. There's a few other little things that I have to add in, but that's basically it, folks. If you have any questions, I'll happily take them. But if not, then thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this module. I know we're not at the end because it's 2 weeks to go, but as far as active teaching, I won't be sending out any more lecture links. Like I said, the next links that I send out will just be for anyone that needs to come in and ask a question, and they will be existing for both weeks. Because I appreciate that, for under test sort of exam conditions, you wouldn't necessarily be talking during an exam, but if there's something that you need to clarify, of course, I'm gonna clarify it for you. So they will be there, but as far as me sitting talking as I have been for the last hour or so, that's not going to happen. So I hope you've enjoyed the module so far. We are near the end. 2 weeks to go, and then this module will be over. If we move back here, week 14 and 15, there is no active class. They are reading weeks. You have a maths exam coming up, I think, as well. That's going to be discussed with Laura, so I'm not going to discuss anything like that. She'll know everything better than I will. But we are hitting the final stretch. So guys, I do hope that you enjoyed the module. I hope it's challenging and taught you something, I hope. But if there's nothing else, guys, I'll let you go. Have a good day. Have a great weekend. I'm available for any questions, obviously, the rest of the day. This video will be going up on the Canvas page shortly. But if there's nothing else, I'll let you go. Work on the code snippet library and submit that to me on Wednesday. I'll put that link up as well. But other than that, guys, if there's no questions, thank you very much.